Today is Friday, April the 30th, 2010, and I'm Dr. Margie Coutre, former teacher and principal in the Knoxville City Schools and the Knox County School System. Today I'm going to interview Dr. Fred Bedelle, the last superintendent of the Knoxville City School System. And since that time, he's moved a long way, and today he happens to be the Dean Emeritus of Lincoln Memorial University Education.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's close.
So we're really having fun today talking about all the things that have happened during his tenure with the Knoxville City School System. So, but first of all, Fred, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Blue Ridge Mountains in North Georgia. I was in Cherokee County, and that was back in the early 30s, so it was cotton patch and a chicken house.
Oh, well, did that help you to learn how to take care of yourself?
That's the reason I went to school, to get out of the cotton patch and chicken house.
All right. And where did you go to school?
I went to elementary school in Cherokee County, and it was a 4-room school arrangement. In high school, I graduated from Murray County High School, which is in Chatsworth, Georgia, in Murray County, and then went to Lincoln Memorial University in my undergraduate program. And after the military, came back to the University of Tennessee for a master's, and 2 or 3 years later back for my doctorate, and graduated from UT with my doctorate.
And how did you decide to be an educator when you'd been out in the military and done all the things you'd done?
I have no idea, other than the fact that I had taught a lot of swimming and those kind of things in my college years, and I just liked teaching. And it was something I seemed to be able to do better than some of the other things that I might have chosen. And after the military, I did the GI Bill and it, with an assistantship, University of Tennessee and so forth. It just was sort of a natural progression. And things just worked out. I had a few extra jobs over the years, but in teaching I could still make a living for the family and enjoy what I was doing, and kept the job. So it's been sort of a natural progression for me.
So you were in the teaching, and then how did you move up to the administrative line?
By accident. The graduate assistantship that I had with the University of Tennessee was elementary physical education, and when I got my degree, the superintendent offered me a job as supervisor for county physical education, and then it turned into instructional supervisor and those kind of things. And after getting a bad reputation for everybody walking home on a civil defense plan that we put together, the administrative thing just more or less was another natural progression. And I had good teachers.
Oh. Who were some of your heroes that you worked with, and were some of the people that you recall that were instrumental in helping you along the way?
The best thing that I think ever happened was that when I was in the military and was looking for an early way out, one of my former professors at Lincoln Memorial, a fellow by the name of Dr. Sidney Rice, and my wife got together, and I guess through some of his connections at UT, got me the assistantship at the University of Tennessee. Well, it just so happened that that particular assistantship was in Knox County and under Mildred Doyle. Mm-hmm. And that turned in to be a real blessing in terms of things that happened to me over the next few years. Mildred was the best politician I've ever run into.
Oh, yes.
And she also was one of the better superintendents that I ever worked for. but her real skill was the fact that she surrounded herself with folks that knew a lot about curriculum and instruction, and Mildred Patterson and Willa Selvey and some of the other folks that were working there at that time, Roland McKeon, were absolute top-of-the-line folks in curriculum and instruction. And they just took me under wing, and Mildred's nickname to me was Neddy Freddy, like Ned in the First Reader.
Uh-huh.
And they sort of treated me that way, and at the time, I didn't care. Just they were paying attention, and I was glad to be where I was. But it was the association that I had with Mildred and the two Mildreds, and the kind of assignments they gave me that Greenhorn had no business getting, but turned out to be some of the best education that I could have gotten.
Good foundation.
And it served purposes for the next 40-something years, because at this particular point in time, I've had 52 years in the business.
Well, now just tell me, how did you get from Knox County over to Knox City now? That's going to be interesting.
Well, in 1960, around, there was an annexation effort in the city of Knoxville, and they annexed 18 of the county schools, which happened to be 18 of the newest schools that the county had built, because it was an area adjacent to city limits where all the population was. And after a few years in court, it became final, and in 1962, I think it was, Tom Johnson, who was superintendent of the city at that time, needed somebody that could talk to or communicate with the principals and faculty that had been annexed, because in those days there was sort of a war between city schools and county schools, and there was not a lot of communication that went on, and nobody trusted anybody. So Mr. Johnson called and asked, would you consider going to work? Well, I knew I'd probably fall from grace if I took the job, but I sort of mentioned salary, and he did too. And so I go to talk to Mildred Doyle, and I said, Mildred, here's what they've offered me. And with that time, I had two girls, and I said, I really can't afford to turn it down. And she said, well, I can't afford that. So it was decided. And I think maybe she and Mr. Johnson had been talking anyway earlier, because they had a very close relationship that the newspapers or nobody else knew anything about, I don't think, because in those days in the newspaper it was Mildred versus Tom Johnson. And she always won, and he always got what he wanted. But it was a good relationship, and he was an excellent superintendent. But that's the way I got to the city schools, and I went in as a assistant personnel director.
Oh, okay.
And worked under a fellow by the name of Ted Ballard, that you either liked him or you hated him, and he was an excellent and very knowledgeable somebody for what he was doing. And we were about 3 generations apart, but he sort of took me as one of his kids and taught me a lot about personnel, and that was a good move too. But I also inherited, when I went to work for the city, Mr. Johnson quit. I went to work in July or August. Well, in April or May, he resigned, and a new superintendent came in. And Knoxville at that time had just entered into a desegregation lawsuit.
Oh.
Well, the new superintendent did not want to have anything to do with a desegregation lawsuit, because you probably couldn't get a job anywhere else if you lost one of those. So I inherited, for the most part, the Knoxville Goss versus Board of Education lawsuit, and stayed with it for the next 13 years, and wound up to be a pretty good ending as far as the city was concerned.
Well, you had information that other superintendent didn't have at that time too, so that was a good move on the part for the school
Well,
system.
he was a Yankee, and there's, it takes a while for a Yankee to get adjusted to Knoxville, at least in those days.
Well, let's talk just a minute about, we came to the point where the city and the county were going to merge. And you were superintendent at that time. Talk about it for me a little bit.
Well, it had been for several years a political idea around here that unification of county government, metropolitan government was one of the things that was on a lot of the areas in Tennessee, and I suspect Nashville Metro is about the only one that wound up that way. But at that time, the legislature passed laws that would let you merge the school system. And all of us knew that it was coming about. But to merge a school system, the county voters had to agree to it, and the city voters had to agree to it. Because of the not inequity necessarily, but the difference in tax rates in the city and county, the city voters were all for it because they would lose the school tax rate. County folks didn't want it because they would inherit a tax rate so it went to vote once, maybe twice, and it failed because you could not get both the city and the county to agree to it. So when I was superintendent, the city council passed a resolution to change by vote city charter to do away with the school system. Well, under state law, the county then inherited the education responsibility for the county of Knox. So all of the stuff that we had been talking about in terms of merger just didn't happen because it had a different legal base. And it's always been referred to as a merger of the city and county, and it simply wasn't. The city abandoned the school system. The county assumed the responsibility for it. It worked out relatively smooth simply because the folks that were operating city and county and the boards of education really didn't get into much of a scrap, and they assisted with it. I was superintendent of the city, and at that particular point in time had reached a retirement time, and it was decided that it would be best for me to retire at that time, and I did. And that's when I began to work for University of LMU.
Well, I remember I was a principal at that time when we did the merge, and but they did a lot of they buddied us with a county person. I had a person that worked with me, and I learned some of the ropes that they had. Matter of fact, I was supposed to be president of the elementary principals at that time, and I didn't do it. I let George Perry was over it, and so with the middle schools because they were together then.
Yeah.
And I just asked George to continue on, and then we broke it up between the middle schools and the elementary, and I became president of that. But they did try to make it easy to come in and make us feel a part of the county as we went along.
It worked a lot smoother, I think, than a whole lot of folks anticipated it. But that's all the nature of school teachers. They'll find some way or another to get along if they have to, particularly if it's going to mess up what the kids are doing. But it was a sort of an abrupt way to put the schools under one governance.
That's true. Now, think a minute, do you have a success story you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. I think of all of the things that I did in the public school part of it, the role I played in the desegregation of the city school system worked out in terms of the benefit to the system as good as anything I ever did. And it was primarily because nobody would do it, and I was far enough down on the ladder that somebody could assign me to do it, and the attorney for the city school board and I were about the same age, and we got along well, and that part of it worked out, I think, real good. We stayed in court for 13 years, went to the Supreme Court twice, got appealed on to the 6th District Court about every year, and on all of the occasion, the appeals court and the Supreme Court upheld the local ruling from Judge Taylor. And in 1963, we were designated as unitary and got kicked out of the court docket for the first time in 15 years. So that was a success story. It could have been a flaming disaster, but it worked out right.
Well, you had some background to help again there. But, we look at it now and we think, why was all the fuss? It's what it should be. And it's
well, it's the embarrassing thing now is that I'm trying to put together a book about it, not about the court case or this kind of stuff, but about the people that are in it. And I'm reading some of the dumb things I said in court and got away with. And it wasn't because I was lying or anything. I was just ignorant. And being an old boy from Georgia, I had a whole lot of prejudice that I didn't know anything about. But it's an embarrassing thing. I can sit in a room now by myself, everybody else gone to bed, and I'm reading some of this stuff from the court record, and it embarrasses me just to read it. And it's kind of thing that we probably should have just opened the door and said, come on in, and then 3 weeks had been over. And as it was, we struggled with it for 13 years.
Well, but you have to remember, you have to go with the experiences you were having at that time, not the experiences you've had since then, and you're laughing about it now.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. If you could turn the clock back, what would you want to change? Is there anything you'd want to change, do differently?
As far as my personal, professional career and so forth, no. I've been lucky all the way down. Most of what I've done is simply because I had good folks to work with. And there were folks that really helped me, wanted to make sure that Nettie Freddie didn't really mess up and get all of us in trouble. And it was a kind of support that I had all the way down. And I've just been plain lucky. There's no two ways about it. As far as the family is concerned, I wish I had spent more time with the family.
Yes, that's where I'm in for me too.
It's a deal. I've got two daughters, and one of them's an architect, and the other one is a minister of music in Methodist Church, and I guess maybe they're that in spite of what I did, and because of what their mother did, because I spent a whole lot of time away from home, and that I sort of regret. But it turned out okay, so I guess I was lucky again. The next success story that I've had is since I've been at LMU. I started to work at LMU, and they were trying to get an off-campus program in Maryville. And the entire program, graduate program, was a master's degree in those days. And it had about 150 students. A few years ago, year before last or something like that, the program that we developed had gone from a master's to an education specialist and to a doctorate, and we had more than 1,300 students in it.
That is wonderful.
So that has also been something very pleasing as far as I'm concerned. And now it's time to go fishing, I guess.
Oh, it's time to get your boat. You don't have a driver's license for a car, you got a boat license.
I got a certification for my boat, yeah.
Well, I think when we look back and see how you've come along, and I've always felt like that if I've gotten anywhere, I've stood on the shoulders of giants, people who've helped us along the way. You just can't get where you are without some help. And you said about Mildred Doyle that she surrounded herself with knowledgeable people about whatever their area was. And I think that's true. That's something we could say for any administrator. Find those that know more than you do about the subject and hire them.
And pay attention to them.
And listen to them. That's absolutely right.
The next thing you have to do is get rid of your ego, which was a problem for me always. But the deal is that if you do a good job of hiring folks, you've hired folks that can do things you can't do, or you wouldn't hire.
Well, we just have to know we can't do it all.
That's right.
You know, and do
That's
it well.
right.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the folks down the years from now? What
Well,
helped you?
no, I other than the fact that there ought to be somebody out there that likes to practice the profession of education, because you may be lucky and have as much fun and as much success as I've had, and it's been because of the folks that I've known and have helped me do the kind of things that I enjoyed doing and knew a little bit about.
One other thing I wish I'd asked earlier, but we're in the throes of a budget year and money. And I was just telling my daughter that every year when I was a teacher and a principal, we would go downtown and talk about money. And that's still happening. What comment can you make on that at this point?
I suspect it'll always be that way, and I'm not too sure that it shouldn't be, but what irritates me at a particular point in time is all the time saying, well, education should be held accountable. Good Lord, it's been held accountable ever since I can remember arguing with Kaz Walker for money from City Council. It's a kind of thing that does, in fact, keep public schools public. And I don't think the public is ever going to abandon us, but there'll always be the pressure of the cost. And unless there gets to be a better connection between the results of an education, and I'm not talking about test scores, and the kinds of taxes that you have to pay for public school, then we'll just have to, public school administrators have to understand that that's the name of the game. What I can't, and I think we've learned over the years that we've gone through this thing where there was a big push several years ago, turn a lot of the education over to private sector. Mm-hmm. Well, private sector is a profit-making outfit, and if anybody thinks you can make profit off of running public schools, you ought to put it in a bottle and sell it, because it really hasn't been developed yet. And one of the key things to our whole social order is the fact that we have public schools. And you can badmouth them all you want to, and I don't care who's looking at this 15 years from now, there'll be somebody talking about a sorry teacher or a sorry principal. But if you really want to put it in perspective, some of the least effective schools we have now are better than the schools that I went to.
Mm-hmm. And look where you were able to go.
Well, it's a kind of thing that the public schools have improved exponentially, and we've had bad press, or we don't pay enough attention to PR. Mm-hmm. If we sold ourselves like Cheerios, we'd be the greatest thing since apple butter, but it just doesn't work that way. The idea that you have to go and ask the public for money, somebody needs to remember, folks don't give you money, publicly or privately. It's something that you have to justify and you have to earn. And I never did like to do it, but it was a part of the job.
Well, the thing about that is that everybody's been to school. They have a little bit of experience, and they either had a good experience or not, and that happens to impact sometimes how we get our money.
I keep telling my own kids, look, just because you went to school doesn't make you an educator.
Fred, how have things changed from say, the time you began your administrative time up until you're leaving LMU? What kinds of changes have you seen?
A lot. And now, part of my answer is going to be very prejudiced because of perspectives that I've had. But the classroom teacher now, number one, doesn't have to deal, generally speaking, with as many youngsters in a class as they did when I first started 50-something years ago, because a classroom in those days had 30 kids. But we're also having to deal with youngsters who have problems that absolutely were not heard of. And the best illustration, there was a law in Tennessee when I first started teaching that if you couldn't benefit from the public school, you could stay at home. We didn't have special education. You know, it became something, the whole program, that program has developed since I've been in the business. Teachers now are prepared, and the requirement for teacher licensure now is much greater than it was when I graduated, got my license. I could teach Spanish, history, chemistry, biology, and physical education. Well, there is no way in the world you can go through school now and come out with more than two of those.
Right, that's true.
And in administration, it was a good old boys club from the first order. At the time I started, and you had to have connections, and whether or not you worked out effective or not had nothing to do with it. You had to keep the connections. That has changed entirely as far as administrators are concerned. It's still a connection arrangement. You do have to have a connection with other folks, but now the licensure process is all difference in the world, and we have better administrators than we've ever had in terms of the art of administration or the practice of administration. The delivery systems, I can remember doing things on paper that had some blue stuff that got all over you. And then we got real good, and we were using movie projectors that broke down and we never could keep going. And then the overhead projectors came along, and then we got into the proposition where we had computers projecting things, and our overhead projectors became wiggly kind of things. The whole delivery system of instruction now is completely different and a lot more efficient in some ways than it was when we sent kids home with a god-awful amount of repetitive homework and those kind of things. But then the kids have got so much more exposure to stuff outside the classroom that teachers have to contend with.
The technology.
The technology, the social order of things. You know, Facebook or internet or texting. The kids get more information and more communication outside the classroom than they do in the classroom. When we started years ago, we had more of the kids' attention during the 6 or 7 hours we had in school than any other single influence, because they had to sleep a little bit, and Mom and Daddy only had 4 or 5 hours to deal with them, and they didn't have TV to look at them all the time. So the whole arrangement has changed, and the good part about it is educators are better educators now than the good educators were when I first started. Most of the young folks now in education and administration know a lot more than I do now about what they should be doing right now. And that's the change I've seen over the years. Education now is not the same animal it was 50 years ago. education administration now is not the same animal it was. If you don't read about 300 or 400 pages of regulations or law or something like that every week as superintendent, you won't make it. It just won't work anymore.
We're thinking about our children. Somebody was saying to me the other day, they're texting and they're Facebooking, but they're not talking,
Yeah.
to each other. Sometimes when we were young, the children, they got on the phone and talk to somebody, hang the phone up, and then they have to do their own things. But we are using technology in an interesting way, and teachers are going to have to bring that into their classroom somehow to keep the children's attention.
My concern is that I think teachers recognize that and parents don't.
That's true. That's true.
Raising kids now would scare the way out of me. I'm glad mine are 40 and 50 years old.
Well, I think these things are sort of babysitting techniques for the parents, and they're in.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but the idea that some kid is driving a car and texting is about as much of a parental problem as it is a legal problem. And somewhere down the line, we didn't keep up. And I don't think any of us did. And, they said, do I Facebook? No, I don't Facebook. Number one, I don't know how in the first place. And number two, I'm not going to take the time to learn, because by the time I learn, there'll be something else take the place of it anyway. Well, parents now are raising kids that'll go through 3 or 4 or 5 generations of technology that we've never seen. And in our lifetime, we've only gone through about 3 good technology generations. And it's the rapidity and the speed of communication is scary, and it will form education in the next 10 years.
That's a good point. Excellent point. I think we could end on that one. And this has been an interview with Dr. Fred Bedelle, the last superintendent of the Knoxville City School System, and you left office in 1987.
Yep.
So thank you so much for visiting with us today, and we have had some excellent information for us to review and look back on in years to come.